Hey everybody! A couple years ago I did a video where I showed you many of the battery options available for the Sony a6300. And since then, Sony's released new cameras, a new battery, and China's been kind enough to manufacture all sorts of other stuff for us to power our cameras with. So while this video will concentrate on the Sonys, most of the information is applicable to just about any interchangeable lens camera you might own. And with that, let's get to it. Alright, first, some background. This is a lithium-ion cell. It is the fundamental unit of power underpinning virtually every rechargeable technology you use in your daily life. And while they do come in many shapes and sizes, virtually all of them have a nominal voltage of 3.6 to 3.7 volts. What they mean by a nominal voltage is that when this is fully charged, it'll be 4.2 volts, and when it is discharged, it'll be 3 volts. So 3.6, 3.7, depending on how good the battery is sort of like an average voltage. And 3.7 volts is not enough to run a camera, but if you take two cells and hook them up in series, you get 7.4 volts, which is exactly what our cameras need. And if we want to extend the runtime, we simply keep adding sets of two. So if we look at the venerable NPF 550 battery, you will see that it is just two batteries hooked in series and then shrouded in plastic. And of course, NPF style batteries have been around for a very long time and come in series of 2, 4, and 6 for longer runtime. And those of you who are into power tools will recognize the 20-volt lithium-ion system. There are 5 cells in here, and the astute among you will be saying, wait a second, 3.6 volts times 5 is 18. 3.7 volts times 5 is 18.5, so how did they get 20 volts out of 5 cells? And the answer is, they didn't. Instead, marketing wrote 20 volts max, and that is still technically true, the best kind of true. Remember that these cells, when fully charged, are 4.2 volts. Well, 4.2 times 5 is 21. 21's a bad marketing number, but 20 volts, that's money. And interestingly, if you were to crack open the battery pack of a Tesla, you would find several thousand of these wired in groups of 16. And this is your standard USB battery bank. If you were to tear this open, you'll find 4 cells. This one is rated at 13,000 milliamps. You'll also find some hardware in here for converting 3.7 volt to 5 volt. And remember, anytime you do a voltage conversion, you're going to lose some of your power in the process. And the larger the conversion, the more power you'll lose. Now back to cameras, you may recall that Sony has been outfitting its mirrorless cameras with the NP-FW50 battery for quite a long time. It's 7.3 watt hours, about 1,000 milliamps, and it just isn't enough to get through the day. But with the introduction of the A9, Sony finally saw fit to create a new battery, the NP-FZ100, which is 16.4 watt hours, just shy of 2,300 milliamps. This battery, along with CPU optimizations in the latest cameras, puts Sony on par or at a little bit of an advantage against other interchangeable lens systems, so battery is not nearly as much of a thorn in people's side as it used to be. Still, there are reasons why you would want to run an extended amount of time or indefinitely. If you didn't see the last video, we discovered that cameras tend to draw the most power when recording 4K video, as you might expect. Of course, every camera can be powered through its battery port, and Sony cameras, at least the most recent ones, can also be partially powered through USB. Now what I mean by partially is that Sony will allow up to 4 watts to come in through USB, which means that no matter what, you have to have something in the battery port supplying anything that the camera needs above that amount. And the only time that typically becomes an issue is when recording video, because your battery will drain slower, but it will still drain. For the older cameras that use the NPF-W50 batteries, they can usually record for about 50 minutes on a battery charge. When powered by USB, you can usually get about 2.5 hours out of them. Now, that all changed with the a6400. The a6400 has all new chipset in it. It runs very efficiently, which means that the camera itself uses a lot less power to record 4K video. So the amount of power that's coming in from USB is very close to the amount of power the camera actually needs to record 4K video. So you can go almost a full day on USB power before draining the internal battery. Now in the current crop of cameras that use the Z battery, you can usually get about 2.5 hours of record time on the battery, and if powered by USB, you can extend that out 8-9 hours easy. Setting up to use USB power is easy. First of all, you need a battery in the port. Then confirm your camera is configured to use USB power. And now, of course, all we need to do is plug in our USB battery pack. And on the APS-C size cameras, they will have a micro USB port, while the newer a7III, a7R3, a9, and a7R4, they will have a USB and micro USB plugs. And I know what you're thinking, why don't I just plug in 2 battery packs? And that's a great idea, but it doesn't really work. First of all, the camera will only draw from the first source that you plug in. And when that source runs out, yes, it will switch over, but the problem is most battery packs nowadays go to sleep if they're not in use. So by the time your first battery pack is dead, the other one's been asleep so long, it probably won't wake up. And so now you may be saying, well, I could use a USB splitter and hook up 2 battery packs. And I have tried this a number of times, and unfortunately, mixed results every time. So while camera's off, battery packs are off, you plug in your cable, and you see that your power came on. Great. However, I turn the camera on, I pull the power, I plug the power back in. First of all, it doesn't wake up, so I try to wake it up myself, and it goes off again. So I wind up with the same problem I have if I hook up 2 battery adapters independently. However, there's an even greater problem. Let's say I unplug this one, and I unplug this one, and now I plug this back in. Well, first of all, it didn't wake up. Second of all, the camera thinks now that I've connected a storage device or MTP device to it. So my best advice here is just to swap chargers using a regular cable. When this one dies, remember the camera will still run because it's using the internal battery. So you can disconnect this, hook in your next power supply, and continue running. And as I mentioned with the a6400, if you have enough USB battery packs, you can run for a full day without having to replace or charge the internal battery. The only way to truly run your camera indefinitely is through the battery port, and for that you need a dummy battery. A dummy battery is just a piece of plastic with the necessary wiring and usually a barrel connector on one end. Now, this is where you have to be careful because you need to make sure that you're only applying the voltages that the camera will accept. So basically between 8.4 and 7.2 volts. Any more could be dangerous, and any less, the camera may think that the battery is discharged and just shut off. Now, most dummy batteries also come with an AC adapter that is already rated for the proper number of volts, so you plug this into your wall socket and you can power your camera indefinitely while you're at home. Now, if you want to power your camera for long periods of time in the wild, one of the most popular solutions is the old NPF series batteries. And typically, to get the power from the batteries into the camera, you need some sort of an adapter. This is an NPF adapter. It actually has a 1/4-20 screw so that you can mount it either on top of the camera or to your tripod or cheese plate, etc. We'll have a barrel adapter that you can plug into. This is a more low profile option. Has the barrel adapter on the side, and you can do some custom wiring if you like, and these screws tend to correspond with a cheese plate to go onto a camera rig. And again, we plug this in to the camera, plug our NPF battery into the adapter, and then turn on our camera. But what if I need indefinite power? Well, I'm glad you asked. In that case, you need 2 NPF adapters, and a splitter, a gender changer, and of course your dummy battery. So in this case, we would plug both in like so. And we would plug in 2 batteries like so. Now the great thing about this solution is that the camera will draw from both batteries equally, and when one is gone, you can simply unplug it and replace it with another battery. And you might say, well, how do I know when to change my battery? Well, that's where something like this comes in. This is an NPF 970 battery that has a battery checker. And in fact, this one also has USB in, so you can charge this battery without a NPF charger. But wait, there's more. We also have a battery like this, where you can check the power level. It also has USB out, but the important part is it has DC out, and this DC is actually 7.4 volts, which is the native operating voltage of the battery. So on this battery, I can plug it in directly. I don't need any type of adapter at all. And in fact, if I had more than one, I could simply plug them both in, and as they wear down, I can check to see what the level is. Switch them out as necessary. Also note that on the most recent firmwares for the a7III and a7R3, you may get a warning that you're not using a Sony battery, and operation and safety of this battery cannot be guaranteed. Continue use? Yes. Remember that all of this is at your own risk. You could certainly get a battery that doesn't supply the right type of voltage or is malfunctioning, and it could damage your camera, so be careful. So what if you want to power your camera off a 12-volt source like your car, or off of a 5-volt source like USB? Well, there are more options for that as well. Let's go back to USB. Again, this is our standard USB charger, and this is called a buck converter. This one will convert 5 volts to 7.4-ish volts. It does need a battery pack that will supply 2.4 amps and reliably, because if it falls much below that, the camera will shut off. So now the USB battery pack, which is being powered by 3.7 volt cells, is converting that to 5 volts, and then this is converting that 5 volts up to a voltage that the camera can use. As a result, there will be losses both in this conversion and in this conversion, which can add up to quite a bit. If you look for one of these 5 volt to 7.4 volt buck converters on eBay or Amazon, you might find this dual-ended one. And the dual-ended ones are nice. Theoretically, you can plug in your battery packs and then plug that into the camera. And you would think that this is great, but the problem I found is that this, much like our USB problem, tends to only pull from one battery at a time. And so this one will ultimately shut off, and you're left without continuous power. So what I recommend instead is to use our USB splitter. Why this works better is because there's no actual intelligence in the system. What's actually happening is that the splitter is actually truly working like a splitter. It's pulling from both batteries at the same time and converting to the proper voltage. Of course, if all you can find is the double-ended buck converter, that's okay too. Just use one end and plug it into the splitter. Now, if you want to convert a higher voltage source down to 7.4, you need a down converter. And here's one that I got off of eBay that is so Chinese there isn't even any writing on it at all. You just have to know that that's what it is. So with the down converter in place, you can plug it into your standard 12-volt lighter socket. Or with the use of a gender changer, you can use one of these other NPF batteries that supplies 9 or 12 volts. Also, if you happen to have one of those emergency battery starters for your car, you can set it to 12, 16, or 19 volts and get power directly from that. Turns out you can also power your camera off of AA's if you get one of these handy-dandy holders. But the last thing we need to talk about here is charging your batteries. Now, there are all kinds of chargers available, and for the new Z series batteries, the fastest charger that I found actually is the Sony charger, which will charge your batteries at 1500 milliamps. It's very important that you look at the specs of the battery charger, because some of them just don't provide very much power at all. So, for example, this is a Z-Series charger. It's actually one of the fastest ones I've seen. This will charge one battery at 1000 milliamps or two batteries at 800 apiece. The convenience of charging off of USB generally means that you won't get nearly as fast a charging performance as you will in the native chargers. And here's an FW50 battery charger that charges off of micro USB that provides 600 milliamps apiece. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention the on-camera USB power solution that I mentioned in the previous video. Again, this is a wire loom clamp and a 5000 milliamp battery attached via a small USB cable. Now, you can find all the instructions to make this on the previous video. However, be aware that this loom clamp isn't very popular in the rest of the world, so it seems to be difficult to source. Other people have had success using a smaller USB stick in a microphone cold shoe mount. That does raise the battery up off the camera a little bit higher, but whatever works, works. And of course, you can adapt this solution to use USB-C as well. So there you have it, a whole bunch of ways to power your camera. If this was helpful, please subscribe below, ring that bell, and if it wasn't, then subscribe someone you don't like. I'll see you next time.